Hey there guys, it's Celine. Today's Friday, the 2nd of October 2020. I have to see whether I can actually manage to get this organized here, because I've had several attempts earlier this week to get a proper video done like this, what it is that I want to be talking about. But it turns out that it's very difficult for some reason. I rely, when I make my videos like this, like you're used to, absolutely and totally on my own capability to sort of combine emotion and words and brain in in a way that works naturally for me. And that's what then I manage to, if all the conditions are right. I don't do anything about those conditions other than check in with what it is that I'm trying to do, and checking in with how I feel. Normally, I have a subject I want to talk about. I have experienced something or other that I want to share. I just go headlong into that, and both the brain, the words, and the emotions just keep each other company along the road. And before I know it, I'm half an hour in and I'm, making some form of sense at least. In this particular case, and maybe in this particular phase, I find it more difficult than normal. And because I'm not used to having difficulties, I don't know what to do. So this is, I think, the 5th or 6th time this week that I start to, have I want to be out there. I want to do my YouTube. I want my YouTube back. But it's like there's a blockage of some sort. So it may well be, I'm going to light me another stick of Palo Santo here, because I think that'll help. Just a bit of goodness right there, and woody, fruity, resiny stuff to keep the flow here. It may be that it has to do with the moon, and maybe Palo Santo isn't even the right kind of thing for me to be burning because the moon's in Aries. It's a full moon in Aries, which is on my birth position, or it was there last night, in the middle of the night somewhere, in my location in the Netherlands. So maybe I will instead then go over to sage now, which I also got in the same oyster shell, and here's a bit of sage. Because for me, sage tends to be more of a cooler down, and it's less heat and less intense. And it's intense, but it's on a very different level, sage from Palo Santo, right? So tell me if you feel the same way. I'd love to hear. So I've been doing all sorts of things. I've been involved in all sorts of past lives investigations. That's basically my hang up here, is that I am trying to, I haven't figured out really how to share things that are personal to other people and that are really involving other people, where I am also deeply concerned myself. And I should only ever, I feel, talk about my side of things, right? My experience. And now I have a lot of sage smoke all of a sudden. So I'm going to move that over to that side. In that way we don't have a constant fog over here, hopefully. Yes, thank you. That's enough. I should only ever talk about what's really relevant to me, what I've experienced, how I go through things. And there have been massive implications, massive the subject matter alone is, it's making me gag in a way. Because there is narcissism and gaslighting and patterns of that nature, a life worth of that. And how you deal with that or don't. I was watching Coraline yesterday. Again, it's on YouTube, the whole movie. Yay for that. I hadn't seen it in maybe a year or so. It's one of my favorites in terms of animation movies because it's about the supernatural and all that stuff. Then again, I love paranormal as well, which is also a combination of the supernatural and the emotional, side by side, and relationships and choices and things like that. It's massive, super. I love those two above any other animation movies, I think, because of that type of content. Coraline, however, I was watching in a very different mode yesterday from before. And I don't know if you've seen it. If you haven't, then what I'm going to say to you will probably not make that much sense. There is a yes, sorry, I had to cough rather badly. It's the throat still. There is a pattern of narcissism that can be detected. It's online as well. If you Google Coraline and narcissistic or something like that, you will get several hits. I tried that yesterday and I was actually rather surprised and pleased at other people picking up on that stuff. There's also YouTube videos even that refer to this. I watched one of those yesterday as well. So there will be coughing. Sorry about that. Why am I coughing? Hang on a second. I think all the coughing has to do with this, with the sage. My tea I'm having like a fruity blackberry hibiscus rosehip type combination here. And I think it also has to do with the subject matter at hand here, because there is the whole thing, like I was saying earlier, massive subject matter, full moon, I'm on my period, all this narcissistic gaslighting stuff going on. I could say just as easily that I gaslit myself, which isn't a completely new thought. People have said that kind of thing before, maybe not necessarily about themselves, but it is definitely something that can happen where you are forced in one way or another to submit to a particular belief system as you grow up, right? And that it prevents you from expressing yourself, from growing, from developing in a way that's natural for you. And I think this happens like all over the place. It's the most common of all kinds of, I don't know. You tell me, maybe it's something that you can relate to. It is true for me that I have throat and tonsil issues. Thank God, not that many immune system issues, but definitely in this area, I concentrate in here. I have to more and more use my voice to only speak my truth. And whereas before it used to be much more rational, so whatever I would give here on this channel would be what I thought about. And the two worlds are close together, but not the same. And that's what I'm basically, there's an area in between that's kind of tough to cross over, and I don't automatically go to what's natural for me, what is really natural and personal and expression for me. Actually, I've been having cards a few times where that came up, where it's like, okay, especially my thought deck has brought out quite a few of these, where I was just picking cards or pulling cards, and it sort of showed up in two different sets of things, and one set would be much more that happened yesterday. But it wasn't the first time, where one set is really about being very confident and also very challenged and challenging, kind of macho in a way. If I had pulled only those cards, then that's what I would have gone and believed in, And the second set of cards was much more grounded, much more, I suppose, emotional, and there was sadness in there as well. And it was like a whole different side, and I couldn't let the cards go. I just couldn't put them back in the pack and just leave it at that. And I tried to record a video about those cards as well, and I failed because I didn't really at that moment. Never mind. I mean, I don't mind skipping a day or two. Certainly not. That's not a problem. I will record, but it's if I have this massive blockage, it just doesn't feel nice. I just don't feel comfortable when I'm running into this roadblock. I mean, then I want to know what's going on. I want to figure it out. I want to get it sorted out and try to move on. So there's that. And I'm looking at my timer here, and it says almost 11 minutes, and I've only talked about this stuff. So yeah, maybe this will just be a witchy check-in. I don't know. Who cares? Anyway, the thing is that from the personal experience side of things, which involves very difficult to actually non-existent relationships with people, from that side to the spiritual side that I really want to talk about, the experiences that I've had in that field, the gap's just too big. So there's another, right, like a gap, like a roadblock going on between those two wavelengths. I find that really difficult to bridge at the moment, and that's what I want to do. So what tends to work for me is, well, like I'm doing now, is to present to you my problem first of all, and then see whether we can actually wriggle our way, through that or around it or over it in some way or other, so that I actually have something to post at the end of the day, right? So yeah. So the difference between the difference between the worlds is just, it's the same set, the difference between the psychological life experience in this life as it has been for me, including the feeling silenced and or not speaking a language, not learning a language that fits what I need or that fits human interaction at all. The moment I say that, this suddenly really makes sense. I never learned to talk properly, in the sense that for me, what is natural to me to talk, how I do it and what about I talk, I'm making a mess of my syntax here, but all that isn't really about being this, a fountain of information only. I love information, I love data, I love the internet, I love to be able to be free to look up things, all that. But it just isn't enough to be here on YouTube only sharing facts, about things. And I think more and more that there isn't really such a thing as an objective fact, even, not in terms of what our lives are like. And my life has just been one long quest for integrity and self-awareness and some people would say self-worth. I don't even look at it that way. I look at it as a process looking for my roots and trying to figure out who the hell I really am, what with all the weirdness that was going on. And so if you're new here, the reason why this is so difficult, when there's a set of reasons, is that I am, just like many other people, a descendant of people who've experienced the Second World War themselves. I was born afterwards. In my country, there's actually support groups, I think. I've never been able to really find anything that appealed to me for second generation concentration camp victims, basically. So the children of the people who are in the concentration camps. If they are available, it's a lot of the discussion will be about German concentration camps, and that's not my direct line where my ancestors have been, because it was my mother who was in Indonesia in a Japanese concentration camp, and that was a different situation. However, I am also a descendant of people who were already traumatized, I think, before the war, and there were things going on before the war. The thing is that it is a massive, humongous challenge to be facing every day of my life, to not only keep it together, to also keep it together, to keep a relative level of sanity and humor and, physical self-reliance and solidity in my life as I investigate my subject matter that I need to make sense of this. So you're using the key to open the box, that's actually the key is inside the box, that kind of thing. There are days where it just doesn't seem possible to keep it together and get it together. It doesn't even make sense if you put it like that. It's a process. And if you say it's a process and you're halfway in and you're halfway out, and I can feel for myself that I'm actually, also looking at the birds, also looking at, my nice quiet place around me. I have a candle here. I must stop believing in this invulnerable, strong survivor that I have only ever believed in as for myself. I used to 100% rely on this, machine of a person who basically didn't ever engage in contact with people at all. And it's not true anymore. It's very obviously not true anymore, because I wouldn't have, you people if I hadn't, if I'd sat here and talked like a machine. I know there's people who've got tens of thousands of subscribers and they actually record their things like in a machine voice kind of a way. I'm not talking about that, okay? I think people are cleverer than that. I have to check because there's probably a cat hair on my face now. So there's the next interfering kind of a gizmo going on. So, where to start? I was talking to my husband just now over the phone, and we got this thing going where I was trying to, actually it was also because of Lisa's video, Lisa's chat about Halloween and Samhain, where she mentioned in passing contacting ancestors and what difficulties you can have with that. And I went into my past lives rabbit hole again. It's like this is where what I've been working on, and this is where I'm trying to get to also, to find a way to talk about that stuff that actually centers it in for me, so that I can continue to give you what I've got, to make sense, to be in control of this subject matter. But it's really difficult because of the narcissistic component in the story, and because of that, because it has been so painful. Of course, there's a cause and effect going on here that I have to stress first of all. If it hadn't been this painful, I wouldn't have gone all the way over to this shamanic journeying business at all. It is because I was more or less forced at knife point, I was going to say, except there isn't really a knife point except in here, that brings me to go again, look for, and I have looked and I found dimensions that I didn't know existed. This happened on Monday. Today's Friday, like I said. Before Monday, I didn't know. I didn't think that I would be able to access any of these. Let me call them dimensions. I know it's a terribly rationalistic word. And I want to talk about how I did it. I want first of all, I have to tell you about why I did it. I did it because my life has been controlled by lack of empathy, lack of energy, in all sorts of ways in other people before today, before now. My life used to be completely, actually all my fears, all my attempts at defining myself in whichever way, all of that was charted out by forces that were basically terribly limiting. I was like a robot, I was programmed to function in a particular way, except that the robot isn't aware of pain, and I was. And more over the past weeks and months, and especially during 2020, I've become aware of my own pain. So am I surprised that it's hard to talk about? Yes, because it's a new category for me. It's silly, but it's that level where you just can't believe the level of what's going on. And the only way, that's why I'm also here trying to get this done here, is that the only way to, for lack of a better word, reinterpret my pain is through spirituality, through shamanic approaches, through meditation approaches, whatever you want to call those. It's fairly consistent. It isn't like a huge complicated set of techniques or anything. There's a couple of things that I do and they always work for me. And I've described quite a number of them on my channel already. If you go at look for energy work approaches and stuff like that in my playlist, there's plenty to look at if that's what you want to do. So I won't go into all that kind of detail again. I won't go into describing all the stuff again because there's no point, but I've done that. It is really about finding. I wouldn't have gone to all those lengths. I wouldn't have traveled all those dimensions, including the new ones, if it hadn't been for the pain. And I find healing in the new approach, and that's the most precious and beautiful thing that I want to share with you, is that it turns out that there are really solutions and remedies, but they're so hard to obtain, and you have to be, we are so strong. That's something that I've goggled at for years already, is that our own strength tends to be our enemy. We resist change, and we resist new dimensions, it's like we are programmed to not look at things in the way that's really needed to find the solutions and the remedies. Okay, yeah, so I can see that. Even now, as I say this, I'm finding that I'm saying a couple of things that I hadn't really completely figured out beforehand. And I find that it is easier to do the ordinary protocols than to come up with new stuff, right? And this is something I've found before. So new dimensions, and then how I'm seeing it now. So I'm going to move over now to a slightly more descriptive approach, I think, hopefully, from how I got to this to what it is that I actually got to. I tend to see now more or less that the life that we lead nowadays, so this life, okay, this life including all the imprisonment and the loss and the lack of connection and all that, everything, okay? For myself, I look at it now as like it is a tip of the iceberg kind of a situation. The life that I have now, the life that I live right now, is the part of the iceberg that's sticking outside of the water, outside of the seawater, okay? So what I've ever experienced during this life, apart from the shamanic bits, okay? All that is in the tip of the iceberg. And already there is stuff in the tip of the iceberg that I hardly know anything about. There's influences going on within this piece of the iceberg, like so, right? That I don't know enough about. I've gone into this a couple of times before, also recently, about grandparents of mine that I hardly knew anything about. Relationships between grandparents that have been enormously influential on everybody in concerned, you know, the kids and, you know, everybody. And there's such patterns going on that I've only basically I've only got suggestions of things that have percolated down to me 50, 60, 70 years down the line, you know, that kind of thing. All this is happening within the actual tip of the iceberg situation. In my present life, in this body, okay? And now, how I tend to look at it, I had another metaphor just now, maybe it'll come back to me, rather than the iceberg. It had to do with ice. Oh yes, I remember now. It was a different image, a different kind of a track, where the suggestion is basically the same. Underneath the water, there's the iceberg, right? And in this case, what I'm trying to say here is that the iceberg isn't more of the body. It isn't more of the genes. It isn't more of the ancestors. The real iceberg is the life of incarnation, the life of the me that comes on, that lives on the earth in all sorts of, hopefully more or less consecutive, we're assuming here, forms. So the personal iceberg, right? The other metaphor that I wanted to go into, maybe just to, you know, have a parallel here because it's fun. This may be a long video, so you may have to pause and get yourself a drinky before you proceed with me, okay? I am having lots of tea and lots of hot water, and I will probably have me a coffee afterwards, just for the heck of it, you know? The other metaphor, I was walking once with my husband in the wintertime in a sandy and moor-like area out east from here. The areas around here tend to be rather, there's a bit patches of forest that I've occasionally shown you. We will be going back to the forest to look at mushrooms very soon, I hope, at least if I get the chance, because I need me some more mushrooms because I'm all out. That kind of terrain, okay? So it's fairly cultivated. There's areas where there's forest, but there's nothing really. I mean, it isn't like massive hills and rocks and stuff like that because it's the Netherlands. It's very flat, and there's just only forest where people think that they don't really need the ground for corn and potatoes and cows anymore at the moment. So yeah, I was walking with husband along a path, and in the side of the path was just like a little sandy ridge, like by the side of the path, and in the ridge were rabbit holes. It was winter, it was freezing, just a couple of degrees below. It wasn't really super cold, sun was shining, it was nice weather, and we were walking, and there were several rabbit holes in a one after the other. Nothing special. And then there was one rabbit hole sitting right in front of us, and we were just gently walking along, and we saw this. There was one rabbit hole And over the top of the outside of the rabbit hole, it was all grassy, basically grass and bushes and little sticks and old herbs and stuff. Over the rabbit hole was this massive, like a diadem almost, or a crown of ice crystals sitting over the top of the rabbit hole. Only there, not at the other ones. And we were looking at that and like, okay, so what happened here? And I suddenly realized there are rabbits in that hole. All night long, the rabbits in the hole were breathing the warm air out of them, and the air passed out into the air outside the rabbit hole and froze and crystallized out onto the grasses. I just think it's such a marvelous little image. I just had to put that out there. So how I use my metaphor now back from the rabbits, alas, sorry to leave them, the hibernating bunnies in the rabbit hole. Back to my story here is that what we get to see of ourselves, of the real self, the real person, is the ice crystal on the rim. This, what we know, what we think of as normal, is that, shiny, glittery rim like there. And we don't know anything about the rabbits. We don't know what it's doing in there, and you have to be willing, I'm afraid, or you have to be pushed, which is what shamans always tell you, is you have to be pushed, you have to be scared into it, you have to be basically terrified into it, because if you're sane and if you're in control of your life, you're not going to set one foot into that rabbit hole, which is your true nature, the nature in this case also of my parents, of what they were doing, where they came from, why this really happened. And to me, just saying that makes me feel like, okay, so I'm actually getting onto something here, because I can feel there's a whole different sense. The lives of the rabbits, the lives in there, aren't the same lives as the lives of the ice crystals that are, standing there. We are basically thinking of ourselves as ice crystals. We are not thinking of ourselves in terms of our soul dimension. So this metaphor actually makes more sense than I thought, which is neat. So that's more or less what it's been like also for me to step over each time I do this kind of a thing. I have, maybe that's another interesting, it's certainly relevant to me, step to take, is that I have had like soul dimension encounters, if I want to put it that way, from the time that I did a soul retrieval experience, which I've referred to several times already on my channel. If you've never heard me talk about that, there's regression videos on YouTube that go into this, that I've actually just gone into once and followed. I followed the regression and this came out. The thing is that what happened next for me was so real and has had such profound consequences that I can only accept everything that's happened before and after as a whole new level of sense that it makes. What I have done, what I have had to do, was to go to a past life through the regression, that is, with the bare minimum of consciousness that I had at the time, to recuperate a part of myself that I had not had any contact with in this body before. So because that sensation of not knowing who this other part of myself is, except of the, except for the very strong sense of a resonance of this is also me, which was going on during the soul retrieval. I cannot say this was a psychological reintegration process at the time, because I had never before encountered that part of myself. I hadn't known. It felt familiar on the basis of an intelligence, on the basis of an energy that I was connected to, but I had to learn from day one, step by step, to interpret that and to make it my own again. It wasn't like reintegrating a lost memory, or it was a lot harder than that. And it was also, at that point and in this way, it was less painful than integrating lost memories. Or that's what I'm doing nowadays. In the past 5 years since that time, I have had to revisit, or that's how it has unfolded for me. I have revisited a lot of my past memories, and I've had to unpack a lot of emotional baggage that had to do with things that happened to me and that were difficult, and that's where all the whole this whole narcissistic thing comes up. The whole trauma history of my parents, my grandparents, comes into that, and all that. It's unpacking and accepting that has been a particular process. It's one particular combination set of processes, and it takes up a lot of energy and time. And I find it really useful to journal about things and to write things down and so on and so forth, and to work with cards and all that. But it is a particular kind of work that you have to do. And the kind of work has become possible for me only after the soul retrieval. So this makes sense. It makes sense that you would go to a completely different level, which is apparently what I did, to uncover a faculty that you didn't know you had. I had to go into that past life for me to connect, to find this faculty and connect with it, and then bring it back to here and connect it into my life as is today. Because it seemed to me that my past life soul part, the soul, which is the theory behind all this, is that there is actually a soul part that broke off of this consciousness, and it are supposed to be me together, instead of just being me here, and it over there, if that makes any sense. This is what I've, have to deal with. It's sometimes still very confusing. However, because once I started integrating the capacity, the faculty for processing emotions, which is an essential part, I think, in how we deal with trauma everywhere. People stay stuck in trauma because they have lost their faculty for integration. And that's what I found. That's what I found in my 14th century or 16th century, whatever it was, past life. I found the emotional and vibrational, personal wholeness, whole and complete, right there with this person that apparently I am part of, or that she was part of me, and we both are together part of a life story here. And because I can use her faculties now, and she can use mine, together we are capable of moving on through pain, to quite an extent. Not, however, completely. There were points during the journey over the past 5 years where I decided that what I was working with still wasn't strong enough. I needed a third point of support for me to be able to move on. And the third point of support is the actual soul dimension. And I've visited that on and off as a sort of a separate kind of a meditation. I started doing that at one point because I felt that I was incapable to process my pain sufficiently. And I had childhood memories, even though, I think there are many people out there whose childhood memories are worse than mine. Maybe there's just a level at which it just gets unbearable. And that's it, really. And there is no qualification of more or less pain, whether they do this to you or whether they do that to you or whether they do all the things combined to you. There is just a level at which it has become unbearable. And all you can do as a kid then is dissociate and fragment and sort of move on and continue on with whatever it is that you're doing in bits and pieces. But what then you really need is, of course, to counteract those dissociation at some point. And in that kind of a context, I felt that I wanted more disk space than I could find either in this person, in this part of me, or in the past life, the 16th century, witchy characters' life capacities. Neither of us had the wavelength that I needed to go beyond, to move further than. At that point, that's what it seemed like. And I said to my inner child, we will have to call the soul, our soul. The soul, I'm assuming, and apparently it's my brain that did this trick at that point, we're going to state that there must be an identity that we all belong to. My inner child, me, the grown-up person that's sitting here talking to you, or at least trying, still. My 16th century self, whatever that means, whatever her name was, whatever her birth chart was, wherever she came from, whatever her genes and her little top of the iceberg, was like at that point. There must be a soul dimension, a soul level, an identity that we all belong to. Let's try to contact that. And it was the inner child inside me who was so desperate, who was basically, feeling around herself in desperation for a point of contact with another human being to connect with, who was so alone. She did the actual work of calling up the soul dimension. And because I was there, I saw this happen, this child was right next to me, and we did this together, and the soul, whatever that means, this yet another sense of self came to us. And our awareness changed. At least for my inner child and for me, this has happened. Because I contain my 16th century self to a large extent. I hope you're still following here, because it's tough. It is tough also for me, because I sit here trying to make sense of this stuff in order to keep track of things. It's not easy. The soul dimension has shown itself from that point onwards consistently as the same very complex, very strong, very powerful set of vibrations that I have absolutely no capacity at this point to translate for you, to bring into words, to other than what I've just said. All I can say is that it feels like me, except it feels limitless, and limitless in power as well. And this, so I know what that feels like. I've worked with this dimension, revisiting it on and off for, I don't know, 3-4 years or so. And whenever I am completely desperate and out of my depth and I have no idea where to go, I will go to that feeling of this absolute self, and I will let it help me calm down anyway, you know? I know that whatever I've got here in this life is represents that. It whatever we have here represents the soul, or aspects of it, or maybe even tiny aspects of it, in one way or another. So that's what this is all about. I think that our persons as we are, and what factors into the life of this moment, you know, of this phase, it is actually all there for a reason. However, the reason isn't rational, because ratio and reason doesn't have anything to do with it. And there are more connections and more in-depth connections, communication in a way, between the levels going on all the time. And what we do here basically is just it's just the outside, you know, of the whole process. It's a much deeper process that's going on. But it isn't limited to time and space either. That's what's appeared to me also. I'm constantly scratching my face here because I think I have cat hair sitting here somewhere and I can't find it. I'm hoping this has made some kind of sense so far. I've tried to describe what it was like. I've had a couple more experiences with other people's soul dimensions. I think that's come to me in a way, or I went looking for it anyway, because it's what I tend to do. And there's the last thing I can share about that, is that it is possible, if there is severe soul loss in a past life, and you feel this, and you can actually, you know, it's a serious business. If you come back to this a few times and you keep getting this very same strong impression that there is soul loss and that you cannot really do anything about it in this frame, in this world, you know, then I would like you to consider this approach, where it is possible to reconnect the lost soul fragment other than through white light. If there is a matter of an identity problem going on, there will be a resolution or a closure of some sort if you manage to reconnect the lost soul fragment to the soul that it belongs to. It's an exercise that takes up quite a lot of focus. You have to focus on who they are. And I have had to do this, and I've had to ask for help from white light. I've actually done this by now, you know, because I didn't have the authority, so to speak, to do this reconnecting business. However, afterwards, I've seen, and I was convinced at the time also that it was the right thing to do. But it wasn't, and the white light took care of it. The white light did the reconnecting of this lost soul set of filaments, you know, back onto the soul that it belonged to. And it was quite interesting to see that happen. However, I cannot connect with the people to see whether they feel any better, you know? These are really weird territories. We'll have to see as we go along, right? So I think this is as Samhain-ish type as I can go so far. I don't think I've made all that much sense. I'm going to watch this back and see whether it's worth uploading at all. At least I managed to talk for 15 minutes. So there you go. Thank you for coming along for the ride. If you have any questions about this type of material, please put them in the comments. If you think I'm nuts, then please don't put that in the comments, because I know so, okay? Have a nice weekend, and see you next time, okay? See you soon. Bye for now.